On this episode of Spooky Action Radio, the Wookie and I will be talking to Mary Rodwell, one of Australia's leading researchers in UFO and contact phenomena. Mary will be chatting to us about the new humans, global awakenings, and how we can connect with our cosmic heritage. So sit back, relax, and prepare to get spooked, right here on Spooky Action Radio.
Mary Rodwell, thank you so much for joining us in the studio today on Spooky Action Radio Hour. Philippe's actually letting me introduce today. I'm not sure he's completely confident with me holding the wheel all by myself.
Oh, you're a big boy, Wookie. I think you'll be able to manage today.
I'll give it I'll give it a shot. Mary, I am so pleased to have you with us tonight. I'm really glad that we get to share you with the wider community in Southeast Queensland. You have done an amazing work over the past decades, and now you're an expert in the field. We want to talk to you tonight. Most of our people who are listening to us are in our area of northern Brisbane and Sunshine Coast, etc. And we want to talk to you tonight about your work with people who have experienced some unusual things in our area of the neighborhood. And I understand you've talked to a number of people who have got some really unique stories.
It's an absolute pleasure to speak with you, and it's always really nice to be able to share a little bit of what it's like for those that are experiencing these things, because they do get very isolated and they do, fear judgment. So the more that the public understands what's going on, the better. The
more it becomes normal. And I think that's I think one of our goals of this show is that I think once it becomes more normal and people realize that it's not as uncommon, not as unusual as what people think, they might be more inclined to open up and talk to their friends and relatives, etc., without fear of judgment. But so why don't you introduce yourself to us and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Right. Well, the shortened version is that I started out my professional life as a nurse and a midwife, and somehow or other I got into counselling after I had my children. Counselling was very interesting for me because the one amazing thing with that is people come to you with all sorts of issues, experiences, things that happened to them. And already I discovered through counseling that, people can have strange experiences. They can have paranormal experiences. And if they feel safe with you, they will often share it and, see what you feel about it. But it wasn't till about, 4 or 5 years ago, when someone walked through the door who said, Mary, I've heard you're open-minded. For this, there's no support groups. For this, people just think, that you're a loony. And, he proceeded to tell me about his experiences with his family, where he was aware being taken up on a craft. He would wake up with shaved areas on his leg, nosebleeds, this kind of thing. And the thing that was compelling for me and really started me on this journey was that it wasn't just him. It was his whole family were involved, his partner and the children. They had all had things happen too. So that takes it out of the realm of, hallucinations and fantasy and whatever. And, the gentleman himself was highly intelligent, very articulate. And he just said, can you help? And that really has started me on this journey, which, as I'm saying, how many years later, 20 plus years later, 25 plus years later, that I've worked with over 3,000 individuals globally.
Wow. How many would you say are like coming from our neck of the woods in Southeast Queensland?
Oh, quite a number. It's whether and how they find out about you is an interesting one. Although I will tell you that a referral that was really surprising for me, and it was a gentleman from Hervey Bay, and he told me that he'd been advised to contact me by his clinical psychologist. So I found that quite fascinating that someone within the professional field was comfortable enough to refer this gentleman to me. But obviously, Brisbane, you told me you spoke with Cheryl Gottschall, who is a wonderful lady.
Yeah, amazing woman, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she does, puts on these wonderful talks and is a wonderful support for people in the Brisbane area as well. But there are others too that offer support on the sunny coast and whatever. And we all liaise within a little with one another, which is wonderful for when you're a bit out on a limb with this kind of subject.
I don't suppose. Do you have any stories of what sort of what's happened in our area? Anything in particular that you think is pertinent you'd like to share?
Well, I'm sure that Cheryl has shared some of the interesting stories. There are so many; it's really hard to pick one out specifically. One of the things that Cheryl may very well have told you is the reason we do these questionnaires is because there are lots of patterns of the experience that are common to most people, not everyone, but to most people. And the standard is for some people actually citing a UFO. They'll write to me or they'll ring me or they'll send me an email and say, I saw these strange lights last night. And, they may have seen them with the family and they all saw them. And they will say they did some really weird things. They were all over the place and we were watching them for a bit of time. And what a lot of people don't realize is that when you see this kind of thing, other things can be going on as well. And that's what not everybody realizes, that not only are you seeing them, that there may be something else that's happening. Some people may have what we call missing time, where they think they've only been outside for 5 minutes, but they'll come inside and notice a couple of hours have gone by, and they don't know, they don't have any recollection why. And that's when I, will highlight and say to them, well, it does look like something may have happened, and they can often find out what that is through hypnosis. So, the scenario may very well be that they've been taken up on a craft. They may have procedures done, and by that I mean medical procedures where the genetic material may be taken. There may be even healing done on the craft. And they, if they've had a certain medical condition, they may find that that's no longer there with them and they can't understand why, for example. So, there's a lot of things that happen on spacecraft that people don't realize, including, adults and children being taught things on board spacecraft, which they just come back and have an awareness of certain things or certain knowledge they have not ever consciously learned.
What I find really fascinating about the work that you're involved with, and I guess it's quite a departure from your usual studies and research in UFO activity, which just to my way of thinking focus on sightings and I guess visitations by craft. You speak to us more of this global concept of awakening, which I find absolutely fascinating. I'm quite a novice in this area. Can you lead me through the sorts of things that you're talking about there?
Yes, and it is a bit of a departure from what I call the nuts and bolts of ufology,
Yeah.
which is, very important. The tangible side of it, the tangible seeing a craft, ground traces, people waking up with, sometimes nosebleeds or marks on the body, for example, that fluoresce under black ultraviolet light, knowing that something's happened, or finding themselves outside with all the doors locked, for example. Those are all very tangible realities. But one of the things that has been quite fascinating, because for me, I'm a therapist first before I'm an investigator or researcher. And the reason that I state that is I'm primarily interested in how that experience has affected someone and their lives, how it's changed them, and how I can help them through the process of coming to terms with it. Because for many people, it's absolutely terrifying. They are picked up in the, maybe in the middle of the night. They wake up in the morning, they feel a little disorientated. They may be very tired. They may, know something's happened, but not have anything that they can remember, for example, and they feel different. So how do you help someone who says, I can't go to my job the next day and say, look, I can't come in today because I feel like crap, because I was taken up in a spaceship last night. It's,
I don't know if work cover would actually have a policy for that.
you know, you're living this double kind of life. And for many people too, it may just be one of a partner, and the other partner doesn't understand, is frightened, doesn't know what to do about it. So they feel a bit out on a limb. They feel very isolated. If they talk about it, there are other people that are going to laugh at them. So for me, the first thing is to give them a listening ear where they can be safe to talk about how they feel about it or what they remember. So that's my first port of call with them. And then working out what is their experience. How has it changed them? How does it, what do they need for support? Do they need to talk to other experiences? Do they want to find out what happened in that missing time that they remember or something like that? To give them a handle on what's going on, and also information so they realize that this is a real experience. I mean, you were talking about that before, about a lot of the public don't know the reality. And I can only say, don't listen to me, go for yourself and look at the tangible stuff that's part of this, the truth embargo on the UFO truth, that we've been visited actually for millennia. And, for me, that's where you have to start. You have to say, okay, so when did this all start? And it actually started, I believe, at the very beginning of our genetic history.
Okay.
And you go back to, what we call the missing link, where you had Neanderthals, Cro-Magnon man, and then you had this mysterious development of Homo sapiens sapiens, where we had twice the brain size, added genetic material that came from nowhere, by the way, that no other species on this planet has. And, and it was all to do with higher psychological functioning. So somehow or other, we manifested. And the only way you can understand that really is, how did we manifest? And the logical one is that we've been visited throughout our history by beings that were often interpreted as gods. Right across all indigenous tribes, you've got this where, they talked about the gods coming down and interbreeding with us. And you've got it through all the ancient texts, and the craft in India were called the Vimanas, for example. So, and they talked about the genetic breeding with these beings. And the Dogon tribe in Africa talks about the Namo, which were part amphibian, part humanoid. And so they actually were told by the Namo that they were that they had the genetics of this particular species, as well as our own indigenous species. So when you start like that, you start to get a reason why they might be so darned interested in us. Because if we've got some of their genetics, then they're going to be interested, aren't they? They're going to want to know where we go with that. And this is where we get to this whole thing that goes from that, which is, why are they monitoring us? Well, first of all, if we've got their genetic material, they want to see what we, how we evolve. And that takes us to parts of our DNA that are called junk DNA so far, that they're called, it's because they don't know the function of it primarily. And they're saying those that go up on the craft that finally get information given to them, that that part of the DNA is being activated now. And this is what we're calling the awakening, or people being activated to be more aware. And so they're the ones that have come to me, and I've worked with them in various levels of either hypnosis or conscious memory, where they're saying they're being told by the beings that this DNA, this dormant DNA, or what's called the junk DNA, is being activated now because we are evolving. We are actually becoming a far more multidimensional awake species. And this is why you're getting so many people now that are looking towards the spiritual growth, that are saying, I can't be in this materialistic environment anymore. It doesn't make any sense to me. I can't live like this. And many of them are living holistic, more simple lifestyles, because they said that they've had certain interactions with these beings, and this has changed them, changed the way that they look at things, from ecology to taking care of one another. Some become healers. So there's this whole psycho-spiritual shift that has happened with many of those that we've actually surveyed. And primarily, although there are still many that are traumatized and are, struggling with this and certainly don't see that as part of their mandate, they may, at the moment, what we're finding with the surveys, that's about 15-20%, but 85% are saying the opposite to that. So we are seeing a preponderance of those that come to terms with their experience as shifting in consciousness, and that we're calling the awakening.
What sort of, just for our listeners, because we know that there's going to be a lot of people listening right now who are starting to ask themselves the question, there was that one weird night where I kind of think something happened. What sort of, you mentioned a checklist of things that you might give to a person. Well, what sort of things would a person would you ask a person if they think something might have happened to them?
It's a very good question, and my particular questionnaire is a bit different to many others, because I look at dreams, I look at feelings, I look at knowings, and also phobias. Some of the phobias may be, and particularly you'll find a very common one, is the fear of clowns or Santa Claus or owls with big eyes or skeletons. And all of those can be, I'm not saying categorically that that's all there is, but if you've got a real big phobia of any of those things, including spiders, I might add, the real serious arachnophobia, it is possible that this is relevant to you. And so, but it's got to be with all the other questions that are in the questionnaire as well. Feeling different, feeling you're not from here, feeling almost alien on the planet. Many people will have that sense that they're not really home, that home's somewhere else, and it isn't this planet. And I know that's not a very, it's not a nuts and bolts kind of answer, but it's a feeling or a knowing that is relevant to this. Some will have, dreams which that are not dreams. They'll feel they've been taken up on spaceship but think it's only a dream. And that's often because taken in a trance state. The difference between a dream is you forget very quickly as soon as you wake up. These are so-called dreams that they remember 20 years later. So it isn't a dream when you've still got something that you remember 20 years later or 25 years later. Waking up in the night feeling there's a presence around, feeling like you can't move, and then a sense that you're being taken somewhere. And waking up, as I say, the next morning, either with nosebleeds, marks on the body, a feeling that something has happened, feeling maybe very, very tired. The other thing is knowing things that you don't know how you know them, like information. People have downloads of anything from, the origin of the species right through to high physics, like mathematics, understanding of cosmology that they've never learned. And all of these are either downloads or things they've learned on the craft. So these are the kinds of things, if you tie them all in together, the feeling that, that you have a mission or a purpose, but you don't quite know what it is yet. You add all these together, and I've got, 3 pages of questions that where you just look at how many ultimately you can tick off. And if you've got a fair number, I mean, some people will tick off, all of them almost, and then you're pretty certain that this is very relevant to them on some level, as well. I don't, they don't send it for me to give them, the okay. I say, look, you do it, make up your own mind whether this is relevant to you or not, because everyone's different and everyone will have different things that perhaps they resonate to. But it's really looking at the broad, their experience, their sense of who they are. All those kinds of things can add up to whether or not this is relevant.
You talk about how everyone's different, and this whole awakening and download activation process is as different as the individual and how they're made up. What's some of the more unusual things that people have been able to manifest after an experience on a craft or some sort of alien visitation?
Well, there's two things with that question that I wanted to say regarding the activation, but also how certain abilities seem to manifest after their experiences, such as healing, for example. Somebody who's had experiences will find they seem to know how to work with energy, for example, or seem to have a connection to animals and feel they can communicate with them is another one. All these kinds of sensing and feelings and knowings all seem to be accelerated. But this can happen not just with seeing a UFO. For some people, it may happen after a near-death experience. It may happen after a spiritual Kundalini type of experience, for example, a severe grief experience. What these experiences seem to do, and it may even be, something like, taking ayahuasca. What this seems to do is to shift the awareness of the individual into a heightened awareness where they can see and perceive more of what I call our non-physical reality, our multidimensional side, where, there are some people that can see spirits, can see energy fields, can see orbs floating about, for example. We call them mediums, we call them clairvoyants, we call them intuitives. There's lots of names. What they're doing is able to perceive a broader spectrum of the vision, of the more of the visual spectrum than the average person, for example. Same thing with hearing. A lot of those that have experiences have actually very sensitive hearing as well. And many of them seem to look a lot younger than their age as well, which is quite an interesting one, sometimes 10 years younger. I don't know what they do on the craft, but somehow or other, the individual seems to be a lot younger than most of the age that they should be. You look 30 when you're 40, this kind of thing.
That probably explains why I look so good for my age then.
I always thought so much.
Well, there you go. There's yours for a start.
Yeah.
But there's lots of different things like that go with this. But what I do, want to say, it doesn't have to be by the sighting of a UFO or feeling you've had that kind of experience. It may come because you've had 40% of those surveyed in this big survey that we did in in this organization, actually had contact after they'd had a near-death experience.
Okay.
40%.
Wow.
So it's more about consciousness. As the way that I've come to understand it, human consciousness now being, if you like, activated from various experiences. And as I say, it may be through, some kind of spiritual exercise, a shamanic experience. All of these really just shift you into a heightened awareness. Some will do it through martial arts, for example, where they're working with chi, with energy. It shifts their awareness. Then they start to see maybe spirits. They may see the angelic realm. They may see, non-human beings, energy forms, light beings, all those kinds of things that may happen after they have that shift in their awareness, a heightened multidimensional awareness, I call it.
Wow.
Just listening to you speak as you do about things such as ADHD, Asperger's, autism, and the link between that and that global awakening that we're discussing on the program at the moment. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And I guess more in terms of the young people out there and how it affects them.
It's a very good question. And, I know that initially it's very hard to join the dots from, contact with non-human intelligences and these so-called dysfunctions. And I say so-called because where I started to connect the dots was very simple. When you're seeing, hearing accounts from people all over the globe, and you're seeing the patterns and the similarities, what was interesting was if these adults were having experiences and it was about heightening their awareness, making them more of an evolved human, as I believe is going on here. What was fascinating was, if that was the case, then why do so many of them end up with children with these so-called dysfunctions? And there's so many that say, my kid's ADHD, or my kid's an Asperger's,
sorry to interrupt. What are the stats about that? I mean, I heard you talk about something staggering in terms of a time period there. We're not going back that far in human history. We had a certain amount per head of population, and now it's just this phenomenal, like, exponential
it's like 1
growth.
in 43 now.
Yeah, it's just incredible.
It's gone since, I think, 1975. I can't remember exactly. I don't know whether it was 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 1,500.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Yeah.
But now, believe it or not, it's 1 in 45.
That's amazing.
Now, a lot of people will say, well, we think that's due to a variety of factors, the food that they'll go into chemtrails, they'll go into vaccinations, they'll go into a whole range of things. And I'm not saying that doesn't make a difference, because I think there is evidence to support some of that. But there are various types of autism that are not related to any of those. There's also dyslexia, which I think is another one, apart from ADHD and Asperger's as well.
Oh, okay.
But I've talked to experts that have also told me that they are absolutely certain that this is related to this whole contact with non-human intelligences, that there is something going on where these children are wired differently. And by that, I mean, a lot of them we've discovered are very psychic, very intuitive. They see spirits, they see energy fields, they see all these things. Some of them tell me, these children under 10 have told me they can communicate with animals. They can communicate and sense things.
And they can see without actually, like, using their eyes. I mean, it's almost verging on Jedi powers, it's insane.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And they're from around here too, some of them. They're not just like over in Asia or America. They're right here in Brisbane, I've heard of.
Whereabouts?
That's right. Well, interestingly, that particular way of learning to see without sight was started off, and it's been done in India, Russia, and Mexico for many, many years. They've taught the children how to do this. But it was called extraocular vision. It's called lots of different other things. The bottom line is that you can show children, I mean, adults can learn it too. It just takes longer because the children are less programmed. You can blindfold them with these particular goggles. And within a very short time, I'm talking, within a few days, you can teach them to see things with their consciousness rather than with their physical eyes. And I've actually, been present where I've seen children do this. And I've got footage of a little girl that was taught how to do it within a few days here in a course that was held here in Agnes. And literally, she was colouring out in detail with these goggles on. And she could actually perceive what she was colouring with these goggles on. So there was no sight involved whatsoever. She was doing it with this consciousness. But what we're also finding out, that a lot of these children naturally have these abilities anyway, that they see, as I say, energy fields, and they've talked to their parents about them. I get to hear about it from the parents saying, my child has told me about this. My child has told me that she's not from here, that she's come from somewhere else, and she's come here because she's got a job to do.
And these aren't imaginative 12-year-olds. We're talking about like 3 and 4-year-olds, aren't we?
Absolutely. One of them was very in your face. I always remember this mother with a 5-year-old girl who said, you're not my real parents. My parents are in space. And she said, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? And she said, well, I don't really look like this. And so her mother said, well, could you draw what you look like? And she said, no, because you'd be scared. Now,
wow.
So many have talked about coming from somewhere else, that their family is one of these different species, and they will talk about coming from Orion or from the Pleiades or Arcturus or whatever, and that's where they came from. And then they talk about incarnating into being a human. Now, when you've got a 6-year-old telling you this, or a 7-year-old telling you this, you really have to take notice.
You have to pay attention to that.
Yeah, where do they get that? Where would they? I couldn't imagine any source of stimuli for that. Where would they get that from? It just doesn't make sense.
It's hard enough to teach a kid like the basics of Bible study in grade 8.
Wow.
Wow, that's amazing.
They talk about the concepts of reincarnation. They'll talk about their abilities. They'll talk about going on spacecraft and learning how to levitate. I remember an 8-year-old really excited. Her mum said she wanted to talk to you, Mary. This was a lady in the US who knew about my work and said, my daughter had this amazing experience 2 nights ago and she really wants to talk to you. And she described going up on a spacecraft with this being, taken to a particular planet, being shown how to levitate and use her third eye for her psychic abilities. And she was so excited about it. She described in detail that they showed her genetic engineering, that they actually showed how they did it to her. Now, this is an 8-year-old we're talking about, and these are concepts that, as far as I'm concerned, are not exactly your standard chat with an 8-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, they're coming to school, aren't they, and telling the teacher that they don't feel that their education methods are particularly advanced, and that they need to work on I think you said on a more spiral learning pattern or something.
Yeah.
Well, how can our education system cope with these awakened kids? I mean, we're still left over from the Industrial Revolution when it comes to education systems.
Basically,
how are we managing
100 times or else I'll whip you sort of thing.
That's it. Yeah.
It's a big one. And no, the standards educational system is archaic and certainly won't suit these children. A lot of them get very depressed. They don't want to go because they feel they're not being taught what is accurate, because it's not accurate anyway. And so, there are some educators that have contacted me, and not just here in Australia, but over in Europe and in the US, and would you believe in South America as well, and even a special education teacher in China who said, Mary, I'm seeing these children that you call star kids. She said, and can you imagine trying to change things in a Chinese school where everything is so standardized and whatever? Just how can I help them? How I'm seeing them. And so these teachers and educators are actually seeing this and seeing the difference in them, including psychologists. I know some very awake psychologists that are saying, I'm seeing these kids all the time being brought to me because they're different. They won't comply with the standard kind of programming. They're unhappy. They get depressed. They don't feel they belong. What do we do? And the bottom line is we've got to wait for mainstream to wake up and smell the roses and realize we are now having this, shift in evolving generations of human, and we need to meet their needs in a completely different way to what's been done to date.
But Mary, I think this is a little concerning here, because everything that I've heard you speak of and what your research, I guess, is pointing towards is, to me, is this sense of urgency. It seems to me like on a global scale, like things are really starting to ramp up and escalate. Like there's some sort of time scale or timeline in play here. Are we heading towards something?
You've actually hit the nail on the head, because so many feel the same. And this is not just the children talking about this, but adults having a sense of anxiety, almost like, we've really got to get moving on this. This is really, really important, that there's, we're running out of time kind of feeling, and the sense that something big is ahead, that we've got to be ready for that in some way. And that is not just one person. This is I'm getting from parents and even older generations are saying this sense of urgency, feel like, I'm being prepared for something. There's something that's going to happen. And, some have got names for it, that, this shift, they call it an event. Some think it's going to be, just a shift in consciousness. Others feel it's not just a shift in consciousness. There's going to be something very physical happen as well. But it's something that's going to shift us into a whole new awareness of our reality is certainly the sense that's coming up. And if these children are anything to go by, they're already there. I mean, they're already seeing things we don't see, having an awareness of their abilities, for example. I think they're the ones that are going to help us when it's time. The 9-year-old that I spoke to said, that she's come to teach the adults. She's come to teach, the adult humans. So a lot of these kids are coming in to teach us what we need to know so that we're prepared for this evolutionary shift, however it manifests.
I think regardless of what exactly the change is, I think we can all agree that whatever it's going to be, it's a positive thing. It's a good thing.
I absolutely believe that too, because looking at our connection to these intelligences, and I do want to say to people, not all of them are physical, of course, as well. When I say the non-human intelligence, I'm talking about some physical, some interdimensional, extra-dimensional, trans-dimensional, higher dimensionals, and some that are possibly coming from our future. So we're not talking about just...
It's a lot to digest, isn't it?
There's a lot of info.
Yeah.
Go on, sorry.
And in all of that are, our ancestors, our own family, relatives, some that see the angelic realm, some will see, the elemental realm. So we're talking about consciousness on multiple levels here. And what we're doing, I believe, is we're being activated to perceive more of who we are and what we are and where we're going, because we've been switched off. And there's lots of evidence to say that it's been a progressive evolutionary shift in humanity, because let's face it, at the moment, it's a bit of a worry. We've got people on our planet that really don't care about anybody else but themselves and are doing their very best to destroy the ecology of the planet and basically decimate humanity because of greed, because of aggressiveness and what have you. It's almost like you've got a 3-year-old with a loaded gun that doesn't know it can kill. And what I think they're having to do is do a very rapid, accelerated upgrade of humanity so that we can actually understand what we're doing, because they say, we are affecting the rest of the cosmos and all those dimensions by our behavior and what have you. And I think this is a consciousness thing that is global. It isn't targeting special people. It's actually depending on how ready you are and how ready that part of you that I call the soul, if you like, wants to wake up and wants to make a change. And this is what I think is why I'm saying it's a global thing. I think we're all being targeted, but it depends on your readiness as that soul, if you like, that's come here to make a difference, if you like. Some will say, well, I don't care, I want it as it is. I don't mind shooting other people if I don't like them. And there'll be others saying, how can you possibly kill an ant? How can you, the opposite, the polar opposite is, I can't see anything being killed because it breaks my heart. So you've got all of that going on at the same time.
Mary, with these awakenings, especially the kids are having, the messages that they're getting, like we talk about it in terms of being almost universally positive, but is there anything malevolent or anything foreboding that's coming to light as well?
It's a good question. I feel, and I've often said this, that we live in a duality, and part of in a duality is that we experience the loving and not so loving, as I want to put it, because we're here to experience. We're here to understand that when we behave in a certain way, there's a consequence to that behavior, which I believe, allows us as a soul to grow, in our human experience. And some will maybe this time round choose to go down that path for their own learning and understanding, and they may choose to stay there. And there'll be others that say, that's not for me, I want to change now and I want to go in another way. So I do, when it comes to, I think there's a complexity of agendas going on this planet, and some of them are from humanity and some of them may very well be with some of these intelligences that, have their own mandate or have their own agendas. I mean, anyone who says, well, they're all good, well, I worry about that. Anyone who says, well, they're all bad, I worry about that, because I think that, we're here in a duality, and a duality means that we're going to get, those that are self-serving, and we're going to get those that are here to help us grow and change and evolve into a better kind of being. So, I can't say anyone can categorically say it's all this or it's all that, because I don't think it is. I think we're here to learn. We've come on a human journey to learn. And it's interesting, a little boy and he's all of 7 years old, explained to me how he came to incarnate into his mother's stomach. And he said, what happened was I was a will-o'-the-wisp, meaning a spirit, and I chose my life, he said, because I looked through and decided which life I wanted, almost like he was going through some kind of, I don't know, context of this lifetime will do. And then he found himself in his human mother's tummy, he said. But he'd actually remembered coming in as a soul and choosing the life that he wanted to leave, and then incarnating into her tummy. That's the kind of thing that I find quite astounding in terms of their awareness.
So with all this happening around us, how should we best prepare for it? What can we do? How can we assist and help those people around us? How can we help prepare ourselves, I guess, for what's coming?
A very good question again. One of the things that I've really come to understand is how powerful thought is.
Okay.
And ultimately, I think that when you are driven to want to change things, or you come from a place of love and acceptance and non-judgment, I think then you change things. What was interesting was a lady telling me that her daughter, who was 3 years old, had been telepathic from birth. And she said, Mary, she read everybody's mind, including mine and all those around us. It was quite freaky. But the trouble is she's still doing it at 3 years old. And I have to watch my thoughts all the time because she can tune into them. What I think they're teaching us is how powerful thought is, and that we've really got to clean up our act in how we think. And I think that's part of the lesson, is that how we think and what we put out is really what's going to change things, is to focus on how we can change things. And the first thing we can change is ourselves, in how we behave, how we look at things, how we judge things, and really visualize it working, that enough people on this planet with the right intent can change the planet. And I honestly believe they can. I think we are so much more powerful than we believe. And this 9-year-old in Europe said to me, Mary, human beings are amazingly powerful and incredible beings, but they've got to believe it first. And I think
that's the thing, isn't it? We really do have to have that self-belief. It's not an easy, straight up thing.
And I think that's it. We've got to know that we have the power to change anything. And let's face it, there's been lots of people on this planet that have had that kind of, had no way of changing things other than themselves and how they believe. You've got Mother Teresa, for example. What did she do? She just followed her passion, and she did what she believed was loving and caring. And look at the changes she made. And it was one person with a vision. We all have the power to do that, I believe. I don't think anyone's more special than anybody else. We all just have to want to change things and want to make a difference. And every single person that does that is connecting to that as well, because I really do think we can create a new world if we really want to. And it can be a loving, beautiful place for our children and our not only our grandchildren, but our, the ones that are coming. But we've got to want to change it, and we've got to want to change ourselves.
I guess you really resonate with me when you use words like passion. And there are a lot of people out there at the moment, and people out there in the community that we come face to face with every day that seem to be just drifting along. And that's the one critical ingredient from their lives, is that absence of passion. What do you say, Marie, to those sorts of people that are out there? What sort of advice could you give them to reconnect with their passions?
Well, that's the thing that ultimately is life-giving, isn't it? If you're just existing, you might as well not be here. I mean, we come into this planet, I think, for all of us to have a life experience and make the most of our talents, whatever they may be, whether it's in music, whether it's in, caring and healing, or whatever it is. When you're not following your passion, you're not following your life purpose. It's, to me, it's as simple as that. But not only that, if we want a future for our children and everyone around us, people they love that want to have a beautiful life, we've got to be informed. I think that's very important to see what's going on. I never really understood what was going on this planet, funnily enough, until I was helping people with these experiences. And it's that started me off on this whole journey of realizing how much we're lied to.
Well, that's it, isn't it? Like, we can't. It's like, for a long time, people have placed a lot of trust in governments and institutions. And the more that, Wookie and I have been out there talking to people and producing Spooky Action Radio, the more we're coming to the conclusion that, we're like a few mushrooms here. There's a lot of stuff that's going on out there that we're not aware of, and it's big picture stuff. It's not sweating the small stuff distraction,
Oh, it's absolutely. And the first thing, of course, is why I get back to these children that are what I call different now, the ones, that we're labeling as dysfunctional. They're just more multidimensionally aware, and they are already tapping into that. They know what's going on. They can look at you and know when you're lying. They tell me about, the fact that many of them have talked about what's on the moon and have explained that it's actually an artificial structure, for example. They are taught this. They're taught the true history of us as a species, for example. So they're cutting through what is programmed into us. And this 9-year-old in Europe said to me, she said, the trouble with school is they program you out of your light, is how she put it. And then the teachers just press the keys. So we are programmed from the moment we are born into a reality, which is a dysfunctional one.
Right.
3D is limiting and limited, and it is not the truth of who we are. Let's face it, if you say you see something that you can't touch, feel, see, smell, or hear, they say it's not real. Nonsense. We're all intuitive. We all sense things beyond that spectrum. And yet we're told not to trust it because otherwise we're crazy, aren't we? There's something wrong with us. That is the first thing that is wrong with our society, because Indigenous peoples all know that we're able to tap into the non-physical world and reality, and that they all do it without any problem. But we're told we're crazy if we do that. You really need to go and see a psychiatrist if you're starting to see colours around someone or whatever.
Yeah.
And the first thing is people owning their truth and saying, there's a discrimination against a personal reality on this planet, which is the first, most, to me, the worst thing you can do to someone, tell them that their experience isn't real. That if that's having a profound impact on them, then it's as real as anything else. And that's where we have to start, is honouring each other's experiences, because then we'll get a real sense of what reality is, and it's multidimensional. It certainly isn't 3D.
Mary, something that I became aware of about 12 months ago was that this assumption that I grew up with, that if you see or hear, or if you perceive something that's not one of the conventional senses, or that you don't think makes any sense, we've been taught as we grow up to automatically assume that it's either a dream or some kind of sensory error or something like that. And yet that's an assumption that's really based on nothing. And I think as we grow up, we get taught to ignore these things, and by the time we're adults, we're almost deaf to them. I think we need to revisit these things that we perceive, and with an open mind, and see if we can figure out what they really are, because everybody's perceiving these things that aren't the accepted convention. Spots of light in their eyes, movement out of the corner of their eyes that looks like a person or a shadow standing there, that sort of thing. Maybe we need to revisit those things as adults and start to look at it again, maybe with the eyes of children.
You're absolutely right. I think we're born literally awake to all of that. But as we go through even our early years, you're told it's your imagination. For example, that's a favorite, isn't it? Oh, that's your just imagination. They talk about their imaginary friends. Well, some of them, I'm sorry, are not imaginary. They're actually seeing them. And I've met lots of children talk about the beings they say guide them and teach them things and help them with understanding what it was like to be human. I think the problem has always been that once we got into this whole scientific paradigm where science could explain everything, we lost that ability to understand that we actually, our senses are multitude in the fact that we can sense things, we can intuit things, we can know when someone's going to phone us. But a lot of people just dismiss it and say, oh, that's just one of those coincidences. And in a way, because we've been told it's not real, we shut down. And many of those that have been highly intuitive as children, it isn't till they maybe have a shock of some kind, a spiritual shock, like a near-death experience, or they go on a shamanic journey. This then activates that awareness again, and for a while it's actually very scary because 1 minute you're seeing the world through this one eye, I call it, of 3D. The next thing you're looking through both eyes and you're seeing colors, you're seeing beings,
Wow.
All of this is happening. And, you can't even talk about it to other people because they're saying you really do need to go and see someone.
Yeah.
Is the first thing, because they're afraid that, you're going to lose the plot, for example. And this is the problem, is that modern psychology is actually dysfunctional. It's a dysfunctional model. I call it a reality dysfunction because, I've met many clinical psychologists and psychiatrists that know full well what they're operating from in a conventional terms is not accurate because they've had experiences, they've seen stuff, and they know. But it's like the elephant's in the room, but nobody can say there's the elephant.
Yeah. So, Mary, from the point of view of like for those parents, those concerned parents, who I think there will be a number listening from our area of Queensland. Is there a place, a creche, a school that you might be able to take your kids to if you think that they are experiencing these things and are alone and need to be able to socialize with other children where they can talk about these things and not feel that they're going to be considered a freak or something like that? Is there something like that for children in Southeast Queensland?
What I have done is if anyone contacts me, I can refer them to other families that have children like this, and at least they can talk to one another. And I've done that a number of times on the sunny coast and people in that area.
Right.
The whole thing. The other thing is, as much as possible, if they're not, your child is not operating very well in the standard school, at least, the Steiner school's a lot more open to, the child and that other level. That's about as near as we can get. But I've met educators now that want to look at a completely different kind of curriculum.
Good.
And, how it will manifest as yet, I'm not really sure. But when we get enough educators, are on board with this and realize that these kids are the ones that we need to create these environments where the child is given the opportunity to be all they can be in their understanding, and they tell us what they need to be and to manifest what they, have come here to do. So we'll be actually being told by them rather than the other way around. So it'll be a reversal of roles, if anything. And I'd love to see that happen. And I've often talked about awakening centers. And one day, something like that, I would like to think, is what we can operate with. So both adults waking up and children who are already awake, so that we can actually support them to do.
Yeah. So now you've written, recently released a book, I understand. Do you want to tell us about your book quickly and where we can get it from?
Well, my first book was called Awakening, and that helps people through the process of having experiences. But The New Human is the second one that I put out. And really, it's the first half of it is on the children and their stories and how they understand themselves and their abilities, teenagers sharing their understanding of their encounters and what have you, and adults that have had that activation. And one of them is a medical doctor in Melbourne who had her activation actually in India when she was on a spiritual journey. And now she acts like a shamanic MD, which she believes is activating human DNA. So she's gone literally from being the standard medical doctor into as she calls herself, a shamanic MD. So she's both. And she lives in Melbourne, and there's a whole chapter on her story, but also on, the religious side of it as well. I've got two ministers of religion talking about their shift and change from going from a more standard way of understanding their belief system to a lot more of an open, multidimensional one.
That's really, really interesting, Mary. How can you reconcile the two?
Well, you have to just broaden the way your lens of interpretation. For example, for a very religious person, they may say that I'm seeing an angel. For someone who's had ET experiences, they may say I'm seeing a light being. I believe they're the same thing. It's just depending on
just different words for the same thing, really.
Yeah, it's just through your lens, your perceptive lens, and how you have, interpreted your reality, for example. But it's all in the mix. And, that one of them, the one minister of religion, lives in Queensland, and it's very brave of him because he said, that I know now that reincarnation is real and that these beings are real, and he's owning it. And I think that's hugely courageous. We need, spiritual advisors that can help people that do have this conflict between what they see as their religious beliefs and their encounters and experience.
Okay, so if our listeners out there are experiencing these things that we've talked about on Spooky Action tonight, or they're picking up these signs from their kids and they'd like to talk to you or discuss something else by way of referral, how can our listeners get in contact with you?
Oh, it's very easy. They can just Google Mary Rodwell and my CERN website will come up, or maryrodwell.com.au. Both of those are my websites where you can contact me. And if they want to see more of my research or presentations, again, YouTube, I've got lots of presentations on YouTube, which will show, why I've come to certain conclusions in regards to the new kids, the encounters, and how global this is, and a lot more of what I think is should be known by everybody. So very, very easy. All they need to do is Google me.
And thank you very much for your time. I know you're a very busy person. Are you about to leave us and go overseas again soon?
I'm going to New Zealand next month to see my family, but I will be going to the US to speak and actually do a course for these children and parents in ESETI, which is the Enlightened Contact with Non-Human Intelligences near Portland in Washington State. And I'm also going to do a conference there. Then I'm going overseas a bit later to the UK and Europe to speak there as well. So there's a bit of overseas traveling done. But, what for me is the most important thing here is people being informed. And that is what you guys are doing, which is wonderful. And, I can't say more than, you're doing a wonderful job if you're putting this information out there.
And you know what? This is actually quite a departure from us because this is probably one of the more serious programs we've done. Hey,
this has been pretty full on.
Because what we find, Mary, with regards to anything paranormal or anything mysterious or a little bit left of center, it comes with it a certain degree of apprehension and fear. So what we try and do is break down some of those barriers or alleviate some of the baggage with a bit of humor. But I got to say that this is quite a departure from us, but a very, very, very fascinating chat with you. I love your stuff. I've had a look at a lot of your YouTube presentations very, very recently, and I got to say it's broadening the way that I'm thinking.
It's definitely looking a little bit further down the rabbit hole than just plain old flying saucers, isn't it?
They're rabbits. Since when did the rabbits come into this, Colin?
Oh, the rabbits. Oh, I haven't told them about the rabbits yet, Mary.
The bright lights are really just the beginning.
Yeah.
That's just the start of the journey. And when you start looking at what that really is saying to us, then it all starts to make sense when you start going down the rabbit hole. But it's a lot of fun as well as challenging.
Yes, thank you very much for your time. Please, we extend the invitation to you to come back anytime and tell us about some of the interesting things that you're doing overseas and some of the cutting edge developments. And I find just the stories about these kids just not only amazing, but just 100% fascinating.
Is there you talked about this ESETI event that you're doing over in the States. Is there anything similar coming up in Southeast Queensland that interested people in our area might be able to attend?
I do think that I will probably be doing more with the parents and children in the future, for sure. I mean, this was the first invite that I had in the States, for example, but I do think this has to happen. And if I get enough, parents with children like this that I know about in that area, I will definitely look at seeing if we can do something, because the parents need support.
Yes,
absolutely. Yeah.
As well as the children.
Yep.
The children to talk to one another and know they can be open and not going to be laughed at, for example, peer to peer, but also parents just to connect, because this is a whole new level of awareness that they have in these children.
That's fantastic. Well, Mary, thank you so much for coming along tonight.
Thank you.
And I can't wait to talk to you again.
In person, hopefully, too. We might be able to catch one of your presentations down the track as well. That would be fantastic to do that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Or maybe we might be able to do a bit of a CE5 event or something like that and see if we can get Felipe's first UFO. What do you reckon?
Sounds good, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mary.
All right. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye now. And remember, spooks, if you'd like to share your spooky stories, you can find Spooky Action Radio on Facebook.